Now somebody's going to say, what about power efficiency? AMD runs so much cooler these days than Intel chips. I don't care, right? I don't care if my power supply has to be a bit bigger. I don't care if my cooler has to be a bit bigger. It's not like I'm going to be feeling sorry for my CPU running hot down there in my case under the desk. Yeah, and I was just wanting to make sure you're not too sick of being so toasty and hot in there. Well, you're not saying anything, so I might just go and play a little bit more then, eh? Yeah, cool. No, all I care about is FPS, FPS. So this video wasn't entirely planned, but I was getting asked things like, what parts should I use to build a computer that I'm planning to get a 3080 or a 3090 for? And to be honest, I was asking myself the same question. Should I go for an AMD or an Intel build? My current gaming rig is about 5 years old, well and truly time for a replacement. And I went with Intel, and here's why. Oh, so I just remembered, a friend of mine, Tom, suggested that it's quite hard for people to focus on one position for too long, tires their eyes out. So here you go. There you go, Tom. Now that your eyes are nice and rested, I'm in no way affiliated with Intel, directly or indirectly. I'm all up to date with the rumor mill on these CPUs and GPUs. I've been building hardcore gaming rigs, sometimes professionally, sometimes just for personal use, for about 15 years. And I also do scientific computing and artificial intelligence for my day job, so I know a thing or two about accelerated computing. Seeing videos around titled things like the one Games Nexus did, 10700K, hard to justify, right? They did a whole lot of benchmarks, and these are the conclusions that they came to, that maybe they'd rather go with an AMD CPU or something. But that crowd has a certain bias with what they want their chips to do. They do video editing and so on. So I'll be open about my bias. I'm a hardcore gamer, right? And frames is the number one thing for me, FPS, and a competitive shooter. I mean, it's true, if you buy an Intel CPU, you're not going to get the same bang for your buck out of video rendering or whatever, but I really don't care if I have to wait 5-10% longer for my Adobe Premiere renders to finish, when I can just go and make a coffee and come back, and on an AMD CPU, maybe an Intel CPU, I go and make a coffee, I come back and, I don't know, read a webcomic as well, and once that's all done and dusted, I've got my awesome buttery smooth FPS in my competitive first-person shooter games, right? And another argument I hear the people making these benchmarks make is that those extra frames per second are going to be irrelevant for 99% of people, right? It's only going to be like professional gamers or people on the very fringes of gaming who all they care about is 240 hertz monitors or whatever. But we all know how this goes, right? All the stuff that's out there now, all the games that are there when the video card arrives are going to run amazing. You'll be able to suddenly put everything at ultra high settings and laugh at your incredible frame rates. But then you've got the game engine developers looking at these amazing frames and these amazing resources and going, oh, imagine what we could do with that. And they'll start loading in all these photorealistic, amazing rendering techniques to eat up all those resources. And pretty soon you're fighting to have those frames that you want again. Not just pro gamers, but us, the average gamer. I'm also interested in VR, and I want to be able to push as higher resolution as possible. And if you're getting up to 4K, of course with VR, it's going to be 4K per screen, which means you really want to be able to push your FPS as high as possible to make sure that you get those smooth VR experiences without any motion sickness or anything. So if you look at those benchmarks that Games Nexus did, and they ran the full gamut with AMD 3700X, AMD 3900X, 10700K, and they compared that to 10900K and the 10600K as well. And often in the areas of video editing, the 10700K and the other Intel CPUs were sort of middling, and often they lost ground, certainly with the price to performance ratio in those tasks. However, they consistently edged out the AMD CPUs when it came to FPS in games. Sure, that was mostly pushed by their single core performance, and you might argue that increasingly there's going to be more multi-core capable gaming engines out there. But these Intel CPUs, they've got pretty high core counts now too, so they're going to come into their own as well. And every one of those cores is these great single core performing cores. And another reason why people are going, oh my goodness, Intel's messed up, AMD's got this huge advantage now, is PCIe 4.0. Now, I agree with what many people are speculating. PCIe 4.0 bandwidth will be needed to get the absolute maximum out of the 3000 series cards, at least at the top end. That said, we're potentially going to be living in a world where instead of performance tests and everything always getting bottlenecked by the GPU, we might start getting bottlenecked by the CPU all over the place. Because these GPUs, these 3000 series GPUs are going to be absolute beasts, right? They've got incredible DLSS for getting high resolutions on the chip, and they've got amazing ray tracing performance. A lot of it is just guesswork, effectively done by the AI. So it's not even going to take huge amounts of GPU to give us those effects. Don't get me wrong, we're still going to use the GPU power, amazing GPU power that these 3000 series are giving us. There's so many other things the GPU does, right? Huge amounts of polygons. If you look at what some of the new engine trailers we're seeing are, massive polygon counts, huge draw distances. There'll be spare GPU resources. We'll start throwing it at things like really good long-range anisotropic filtering or whatever. But despite all that, there's just going to be so much raw power. The CPU and these large open worlds, huge game areas, lots to keep track of, CPU may well be starting to hold back these cards. So you've got these AMD CPUs, right? And sure, they're on PCIe 4.0. You might get the bandwidth that you want for supporting the kind of traffic that these 3000 series cards are going to have between the CPU and the GPU. However, that doesn't do you much good if your 3700X is bottlenecking, right? Because you're not going to take full advantage of the PCIe 4.0 anyway. So you sort of got the scenario where you could be over here on an Intel platform and your bottleneck is your PCIe 4.0 bandwidth, or you could be over here on AMD and you've got all the bandwidth you could want, but your CPU is your bottleneck. Either way, you're not accessing the full potential of your 3000, your 3080 or your 3090 card. So which bottleneck are you better off with, PCIe 4.0 or the slower CPU, right? Another suggestion Tom had, show some cleavage. I thought, well, I got a meat cleaver upstairs. We had a roast dinner just this evening. Super easy. That was some gorgeous cleavage, barely an inconvenience. So which bottleneck are you better off with, right? PCIe 3.0 or a CPU that's not keeping up? Now, if you do choose Intel, you're going to get a Comet Lake chip, maybe a 10700K, whatever you want to get. It's going to do pretty well. Let's face it, if you are bottlenecked by your CPU, you're doing amazingly well, right? Your GPU is incredible to just be doing that. So to be making full use of our CPUs, what an amazing problem to have. Great world to be in, right? But when maybe the next generation or half generation comes around, if we want to see a bump that's going to really make that 3090 or 3080 come alive, if I'm on an Intel platform, I'm going to see Rocket Lake show up, which is going to introduce PCIe 4.0 support to my graphics card slot on the same Intel platform. Suddenly, I'm going to get that bandwidth boost. I'm going to have these amazing gaming cores to keep up with it, right? Might not even get CPU bottlenecked. I don't know how good the Rocket Lake CPUs are going to be at gaming. Comet Lake ones are already really good, right? And I can guarantee that Rocket Lake won't be worse. It's going to be a redesigned CPU architecture, right? You've got great gaming core performance that we already know, or better, and you've got PCIe 4.0 support. You're away laughing. You should get a really good boost in terms of what you're getting out of that 3080 or 3090 GPU. On the other hand, if you're on the AMD platform, maybe you've got your 3900X CPU in there, it's probably going to be holding you back. It's going to be your bottleneck, right? And you're like, okay, well, I just want a faster chip. What's AMD got for me this generation? Well, they've got a new socket for you. So now you're looking at upgrading your motherboard and your CPU.
If you do plan to go down the AMD road, at least wait until later in the year. AMD has been consistent in saying that they do still plan on releasing their 4000 series Ryzens this year. That said, even though the marketing material says they're supposed to compete with the Rocket Lake chips, I don't see any evidence to strongly suggest that they're going to do any more in terms of gaming than what the 10 series is doing now with Intel. That said, it's a new processor architecture, maybe it'll surprise us, but you're still going to be stung for that expensive AMD board, and those are the last chips that you're going to ever see for those motherboards, because whatever AMD releases next year, when Intel is releasing their Rocket Lake chips, is not going to work on your board. So if you're not happy with the partnership that chip is giving your GeForce 3080 or 3090, then you're going to be stuck.
Whereas with the Intel platform, you're just looking at a CPU upgrade to get really the max you can out of that 3080 or 3090 GPU. Because fortunately, most manufacturers of Z490 motherboards, which support this 10700K Intel 10 series CPUs, have committed to supporting PCIe 4.0. There's a fantastic video from Tech something or other, which really lays out which manufacturers have put what is needed on the boards, and it's 90% of them, right? So check out the article for your board model, but it's super easy to find a motherboard where putting in a Rocket Lake CPU is simply going to unlock PCIe 4.0, at least for your graphics card, right? Less of them will do it for your M2 hard disks. Those don't need that extra bandwidth really anyway. You're not going to notice any difference. It's the PCIe graphics slot which really counts. And if you're planning like this to upgrade in a little bit on the CPU front to get that extra bump, why not just get a 10600K? Save your dollars for when you can get that Rocket Lake CPU. And with the 10600K, that's one price point where even people doing video and so on benchmarks are looking at that price to performance ratio and they're going, you know what, the 10600K really does make good sense. And having a 10600K instead of a 10700K is probably not going to hurt you much when you've got some bottlenecking coming in through PCIe 3.0 anyway. And it's not like it's slow, you know, if you're actually bottlenecked by a 10600K, you've got some mean graphics performance happening there, right? It's not going to be that long till Rocket Lake comes around, probably early next year. Then you can take those dollars you pocketed and splash out on that Rocket Lake, and that's all you need. Pop it straight into the same CPU socket, same cooler, and boom, you're away laughing with massive performance out of your 3090. Anyway, that's one perspective. Feel free to criticize, tear the argument apart. I'll be really interested to hear other perspectives. Thanks for hearing me out.